Portfolio Composer, episode 170.
You're listening to the Portfolio Composer podcast with your host and coach Garrett Hope, where he teaches you what it takes to master the business end of writing music through mindset, marketing, and business skills. Make sure to sign up for the newsletter at theportfoliocomposer.com for exclusive offers, business insights, and information not shared on the podcast. And now, for this episode of the Portfolio Composer.
Opera is not a solo art form. That it's a communal effort. And it's no matter what you're writing, it's going to be something that's being contributed to by many, many people. And that you should always have someone else write the lyrics and someone else writing the book, so that you have people who are really good at writing story and people who are really good at writing words, so that you can concentrate on doing your role. And if you try to do all of it at the same time, I think that the work of art is going to suffer. And you really have to sort of create a community of people to get the work done. And then when you create a community, that energy is a thing that will, all sorts of things will come from that. But if you're working on your own, that's almost impossible. The opera is just not going to get done, or it's not going to be as good as it possibly could be.
Hello, and welcome to this episode of the Portfolio Composer. I am your host, your coach, your teacher, Garrett Hope, and I'm very excited you're joining us today because we have a very interesting topic to explore. This is something that many of you have sent me emails asking me questions about, and I'll be scratching my own itch because I'm also interested in producing contemporary opera. But I have two of the hosts for the Indie Opera podcast with us today, Peter Szep and Walker Lewis. Welcome, Peter and Walker.
Hello.
Hello. Hi. Nice to be here.
Yeah, I'm so excited to have you guys. So let me tell you a little bit more about these two gentlemen. Peter is a conductor, producer, and podcaster, and he's founder or one of the co-founders of the Indie Opera podcast. And he participates in the New York Opera Alliance and the New York Opera Fest. Walker is a stage director, has been acclaimed by the New York Times for his imaginative staging. His recent work includes the Apprentice scenes at Santa Fe Opera, The Companion with American Opera Projects, Glory Denied in Opera Idaho, and The Pirates of Penzance and the Threepenny Opera with Amarillo Opera, and The Whole Truth and the Cask of Amontillado with the American Modern Ensemble. And he has an upcoming gig with A Streetcar Named Desire at Opera Idaho. So these guys are in the scene. They're doing opera in the United States right now. And part of the reason I reached out to them is because through their podcast, they really are paying attention and talking about what opera is happening in the States, and they're interviewing composers and directors and everybody to talk about it. It's pretty awesome. And in fact, on their website, the Indie Opera website, which you can go to at indieopera.com, they have this manifesto, which describes just great and really encapsulates what they're doing. We, Indie Opera that is, want to know what is happening in the world of opera, premieres, innovative independent producers, living composers, who are experimenting to find the future of opera. There are magazines and websites dedicated to opera, but they tend to focus on the same handful of companies. And there are websites that feature collections, individual festivals, and individual opera companies' work. But we want to focus on all of these great companies in one podcast. It may be impossible, but we're going to try. And so, gentlemen, I think you are trying and succeeding. So let's just start here. Tell us about the generation of indie opera. How did you come to create this podcast? And yeah, we'll just begin with that.
Okay, so it was started about 6 years ago, and my friend Noah and I, who's a singer and is a wonderful interviewer and a stand-up comic, we just sort of said, let's see if this is possible, because, I've always been interested in what's going on in opera, but I never could find a place to really get the inside scoop on what was happening. And I found that the more I looked, the less I found. So basically what I did was I started asking people directly, what's going on? Who's doing things? And then it started there. We started talking to the people that we knew. And then eventually realized, wow, there are all these other networks out there and all these other great composers. And every single month we find someone new and interesting to have on the show. And there are people that I've been wanting to interview for years. We just haven't gotten to them yet, you know?
Right.
There's so many great young opera composers out there. And Walker's been with us for what? How long have you been around, Walker?
No.
3-4 years.
Yeah.
Walker and I had worked together on something, and I really enjoyed working with him, and he seemed to have a nice point of view that I thought would be a nice addition to the podcast as well. So we invited him to join, and he's actually asked some of the best questions. He's a more level head than anyone else, because we get all crazy. So.
Well.
Yeah, and the nice thing is that each of the co-hosts is in a different branch. So one's a singer. Brooke Lammer's a singer. I'm a conductor, and Walker's a director. So we look at things from different sides. So there's always a new question to ask, and we always have different interests. So it's really nice to have a combination of people looking at whatever the subject is from so many different angles, you know.
Now, I see on your website that you guys have recently released episode 43. That came out yesterday.
Yeah.
So of those 43 episodes, what are some of your personal favorites? I know that's a really loaded question, but I know that there must be one or two interviews or topics you guys discuss that stand out for you individually.
Well, you know, I think this is so funny because it was the weirdest podcast we ever did. Do you know who M. Lamar is?
I was going to say that too.
No.
Oh, really? Yay.
Yeah.
Yay. M. Lamar is this amazing performance artist who's actually the identical twin brother of, now, I don't remember who's his identical twin brother? He's on Orange is the New Black. What's his sister's name?
I forget.
Orange is the New Black. Anyway, so he's got this really sort of like wild personality, and I don't watch Orange is the New Black, unfortunately, but he does these very confrontational works where he doesn't necessarily care as much about the audience. He's just going for art really deeply. And he just said the room was like on fire because he would say things. And I mean, I've never been so like, how can you say that? Like it was all about the art. And he said he didn't care about the audience.
Wow.
And yeah, which I thought was...
hated musical theater.
He hated musical theater. He didn't care about the audience.
Yeah.
That's controversial.
Yeah.
Well, I said if the audience, you don't care about the audience, then why don't you just go home and perform in a closet on your own? And why do you even do this? And that really got him going. And it was really, we had so much fun. I really loved that interview.
And I think that was episode 33 of your show.
Yeah, that was almost a year ago.
Yeah.
So I'll provide links to all these shows in the show notes here so the listeners can very quickly go and find them themselves.
There's lots of good ones. I really liked when we had on Nico Muley, but that was quite a while ago. Mm-hmm. But he actually called us in the middle of rehearsals for two boys while they were in their dress rehearsal about to perform in London, the world premiere. And he actually Skyped in from London during his 1 hour break.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Wow.
So
also, Paola Prestini was great. That was really interesting. And also, we had Robert Patterson and David Cody, who the creators.
Oh, that was great.
Yeah, I was actually going to bring that one up as one of my favorites.
Oh, really? Yeah.
Yeah.
That was fun because it's fun to get two collaborators in at the same time. Then you get to see the dynamic between them, and how each of them think about the work in a different way. So I found that very fascinating.
Yeah, and Robert's been on the Portfolio Composer, and I also contributed to his Kickstarter to get that opera off the ground.
Oh, cool!
So yeah, you guys are doing great work, and I think it's fantastic.
You know that Walker was involved with Three-Way too.
Oh no, I didn't.
Yeah. I directed one one of the three parts, the companion, earlier in New York before the production in Nashville, and they're just amazing to work with. They're both so much fun, so talented, and I think that what they're doing might be one of the futures of opera for sure. They're doing very, very interesting stuff.
Oh, cool. Yeah, they are. Yeah. Well, like I said in the intro to the podcast here, I have a personal itch I want to scratch by talking to you guys, but I get asked a lot about contemporary opera. So this is a very broad question to start down this avenue of thought. But what does it take to produce opera now? Like if I wanted to just write something and produce it here where I live, what are all the things that I need to take into consideration? I realize that is a tremendously huge question.
Yeah, what's the number one thing you would recommend, Walker? I have something in mind, but
I think you just have to be. Number one, you have to be very specific of what your goals are. Because you mentioned, how do you get an opera staged? But the first question is, where do you want to stage it? Because, if what you just said is true, if you want to do it where you live, you can start by looking at, okay, is there an opera company? Are there several opera companies here? Or if not, could I do it myself? I mean, people do this stuff in their living rooms. They do it in garages, so it depends how far you want it to go and also how big it is. I mean, number one, I guess I would say, what are you inspired by? See where that leads in terms of a story. If you're thinking in terms of what's easier financially, you would perhaps choose a story that has a somewhat small cast. Mm-hmm. I think that definitely helps operas get produced more often, and with a smaller sized orchestra. All right,
I'm going to stop you right there. Let's dig into that. Now, I was told when I was doing my doctoral document, my dissertation, I wrote one act. Mm-hmm. And the advice given to me was small cast where each actor or actress can play multiple roles and have more roles for females than males because there tends to be that more available. Would you agree with that?
There's certainly millions of sopranos and mezzos out there, but I wouldn't start limiting myself there. I think, it's also important to follow your inspiration. And if you want to make an opera, with about 5 guys, then do it. I think that's important too, because it's a long process. It's a very long process. It can take years, several years to get an opera off the ground, to have you feel happy with it, depending on who the librettist is. There's so many stages, so you want to have something that you're very, very passionate about.
Okay.
So now I'll do my data dump because I have a beef.
Oh, go for it. I love it when people get on a high horse.
Well, it's actually it's pretty simple. It's just a very simple message that opera is not a solo art form, that it's a communal effort. And it's no matter what you're writing, it's going to be something that's being contributed to by many, many people. And that you should always have someone else write the lyrics and someone else writing the book, so that you have people who are really good at writing story and people who are really good at writing words, so that you can concentrate on doing your role. If you try to do all of it at the same time, I think that the work of art is going to suffer. And you really have to sort of create a community of people to get the work done. And then when you create a community, that energy is a thing that will, all sorts of things will come from that. But if you're working on your own, that's almost impossible. The opera is just not going to get done, or it's not going to be as good as it possibly could be. So that's number one. Number two is be flexible. Be flexible. A lot of composers have this sort of vision for what a work can be. And when they bring their collaborators in, the director, the whatever, they have this vision of it that they don't want to waver from, and that, that's what it means to be an artist, but not in this art form. This is an art form that's a community art form. There are many, many contributors. Every singer, the costume designer, the lighting, it's all going to be something different than what you originally imagined. So that's my beef.
Okay.
Wait, but what if the composer is a good librettist? I mean,
name one.
Stephen Sondheim.
Everyone brings up Stephen Sondheim, I love Stephen Sondheim.
Mark Adamo.
I don't want to read these people, point out the problems. But listen, Stephen Sondheim had a problem with his books. His second acts are really a problem. When he was working with other people, it was much, much better. When he had another story, he is much, much better. And I was talking to someone last night about this because I knew we were going to get interviewed. And they said that even Stephen Sondheim he had other people bringing in to get these books done. But if he had if he had trusted other people more, maybe he wouldn't have his second act problems. He does have, and it's like saying, I've been to opera companies where the opera director is also going to sing in the piece. Do one thing amazingly well. Focus on it, because if your attention is divided, it's not going to be as good as if it's a shared work of art. Because it's not, it's not like writing a piano concerto or an orchestra piece. It's a different animal, I guess, is the message.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I have two thoughts I want to explore here, but let's just go down one, and it's going to be a big one. You started off, your first beef was how opera is a communal effort, and you were basically saying you need to form a team of collaborators.
Yeah.
You have the librettist, you have the composer, but who else needs to be on the team? One big thing that people sometimes leave out is what's a thing called a dramaturg. A dramaturg?
Do you know what a drum?
No, yes, that's a new word for me.
Is? What?
Yeah.
Really?
Okay.
Composers, they have to learn about dramaturgs. Yeah.
Well, teach me.
A dramaturgy is someone who looks at a piece for its historical correctness. It's making sure that, I wish I could come with some good dramaturgical things, making sure that the priests are kneeling at the right point. The director uses a dramaturg to make sure everything, makes sense. Like, yes, let's say you're writing an opera that involves Jewish characters. Well, make sure that what you're writing for them is appropriate to that culture. Mm-hmm. Dramaturgs are people who answer those kind of questions.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's important because that it makes it easier for everyone, because then that person just focuses on just that. If you want to learn about dramaturgy, there's one in particular who I've met, who I really like, named Corey Ellison.
Yes, who is on the podcast.
Who has been on the podcast. You can go to CoreyEllison.com. That's CoreyEllison. I hope she doesn't mind us giving out her website. But if you go to her website, it says what's a dramaturg, and it really explains what it is and what she does. And I think that would be very helpful. But I also think that when you begin creating a project, I don't think you need to have 20 people in the room to begin writing an opera, because that's also overwhelming. I mean, every opera is a story, and it starts from an idea and inspiration. And I think that if you want to just start with an idea and then approach a librettist and see, because if you want to work with a librettist, you have to find someone who you like, who you feel like you can communicate with. And sometimes you need to go to like workshops or something like that to meet the right person. But, it will become a collaboration between the two of you. And it will go in a different direction than you originally thought, probably, just like Peter said. But I think it can start with those two. Then when it starts getting off the ground into an actual production, you can bring in the dramaturg, stage director, designers, etc.
So now, do you is it general knowledge the difference between between a lyricist and a librettist? Does everyone know the difference?
Well, the way I understand it is a lyricist would be one who's writing lyrics for a song, where the librettist is actually crafting the whole book, right? It's like a script.
Right. Right.
And that could include lyrics to arias and recitatives and other things, but it's the whole thing.
Right. Sometimes it's the same person.
Right.
And sometimes it's a separate thing altogether.
Okay. So as a composer who's done primarily instrumental things, and I've done works for choruses as well, I'm very comfortable and I know what it's going to take to hire musicians and book venues, but the whole idea of bringing in a dramaturg, that's new to me. I've also gone as far as hiring lighting directors or lighting people, designers, to help bring a new element and a life to my live performances. But we also need to consider things like costuming, right? And choreography.
Yeah, eventually, you need to get the piece done first.
Well, okay. Let's assume it's written.
Don't get complicated. Just keep it. An opera is an extremely complex piece of art, as you know. I mean, you can't you don't make it more complicated than it is. Just pick. Decide what the story is. Who are the characters? I mean, there's so many places it can go.
But Garrett, you're asking a question though. You're asking a question as a producer, right?
Well, I guess in a way, yeah. I'm assuming the music's done. I've been in collaboration with my librettist. We've got our story. I've got the music, and I'm ready to make it happen.
Okay. Well, but the question is then maybe getting a person whose role is to be producer, so that you can continue to refocus on the composition while other people worry about getting costumers, lighting designers, so that you shouldn't have to worry about that. Okay. A producer is a whole separate role. And I think as a composer, you're probably really used to producing a concert with an orchestra. But in the theater, it's really great to have someone that's what they do, is they produce opera or they produce theater, because that's a whole level of experience that I don't think as a composer you need to, it would be great to have someone else to do it.
Yeah, I mean, ideally, but the problem is in a lot of small, low budget productions, there isn't a producer, and often the director, the stage director,
becomes a producer, right?
With all of that, and that is a lot of work, because the producer's job is essentially to find the costume designer, the lighting designer, someone in charge of props, makeup. Find the venue, make sure all of those technical things, and then how much, what's the admission, where do people sit, how do you do all of that? So once you want to produce something, there's a lot of jobs to do.
Yeah, and it seems to grow exponentially at some point.
It takes a village.
Yeah,
but you can definitely do it with. I mean, I've directed a lot of things where it was just me, a lighting designer, a set designer, and a costume designer. I mean, if you don't have sophisticated enough lighting, you to me, I mean, those are the three key designers that you really need: lighting, costumes, and set.
Right. And that brings up an interesting thing. Now, if we're talking about a lot of the indie stuff that the two of us have been involved in, a lot of indie companies are doing things in bars. They're doing them in unusual locations like warehouses, things like that. So things can be scaled unbelievably. An opera doesn't have to be the huge thing. Operas can be done with the piano and singers, and that's it. Of course, I'd like to say lighting is if you're performing outside, it doesn't feel like an opera. But if you're performing outside at night and it's lighted, then it feels like an opera. There's something magical about lighting. That's just personal. I don't know what it is.
Lighting is the most flexible and most powerful of those three. Because if you just have an empty room, but you have some lighting elements that you can mess around with, you can create something amazing.
Even with street clothes.
Yeah, even if you don't have a real set or costumes. Yeah.
Wow. Okay, so here's a big question. Can composers today generate income writing for opera?
Oh, wait. Can composers, plural?
Sure.
It's an interesting question.
Why? Composers want to know if they want to write opera, but they also want to be able to, buy their groceries. They want to make a living.
Yeah. I mean, but the saying plural, no, not everyone can. I mean, to be totally honest, not everyone can. There's a lot of people who want to write opera. But can a composer make a living that way? Yes. Do you understand my answer? It's a different answer than composers. Not everyone can. I mean, it's just not. I don't think in classical music everyone can. It is certainly possible. It is happening. Walker, are you totally music supported? I'm not.
Oh no, I'm not. No, I mean I have multiple jobs. I mean, they're all related to directing, or teaching theater or various things. But it's very, very difficult to make a living completely on one aspect of theater or opera. I mean, in order to do that, you would need to either get so many tiny gigs that would add up to a living, or you would need to start getting jobs right away at really large, well-funded companies like Santa Fe Opera or Philadelphia Opera, Dallas Opera, and it takes a while to get there. Mm-hmm. Once you get there, you can start pulling in some money, but even then, it's hard to get multiple gigs like that in a year.
Right.
So it's a really long process to make money. So it's the smarter thing to do is to get something that will tide you over, from day to day, so you don't have to worry about money. The money's coming in, the rent is paid, the groceries are paid for, and then focus on your music and. Let it be just about the music, not about making money.
Right. Well, let me clarify my position a little bit. I mean, that's where the name of this podcast comes from. The portfolio composer, the idea is to generate a portfolio of income producing activities. It's very rare that composers today can make a living just doing one of the many things that we do musically, right?
Right.
I mean, it's kind of everyone's dream that they can make enough through commissions that they just can sit down and write music for 6 hours a day. Well, that's just not going to happen.
Well, I mean, the lucky thing for you composers is that you can compose not only opera but also instrumental music. Like Robert Patterson.
Sure, yeah.
He writes choral music, piano concertos, and when you add all that stuff together, it can amount to something.
Well, I think, and this is where I was going from in the question is. If one slice of my income generating pie, and if I were to focus on writing opera, is there a way that I could actually begin to support myself? Or is every independent opera production I'm going to put on from here until the end of my time here is going to be a money losing operation?
I don't think it necessarily has to be money losing. I think you can, if you're smart about it, if you're smart about the venue and who you're working with and what if you use friends, for example, there are definitely ways where you can lower your production costs. And you can make money. You definitely can make money. The question is, how much money can you make? I think that, and I think it's a long process.
Are there any like completely commercial opera companies? I mean, they're all nonprofits. Even the Met's nonprofit, right?
Yeah, I think so.
And yeah, I mean, are there any companies that are really raking in the dough?
No.
There isn't. It's not. I don't think. I mean, art in general is not a place to go to survive. Now, there's commercial music, but there's no commercial opera that I know of. Do you know what I mean? That's not a cultural thing that exists.
Right.
What do you think, Walker?
Yeah, it's just, I don't think it's, I think if you want to make a lot of money, it would quickly, you're probably better off like writing for TV or film.
Yeah.
There's a lot more money there to be, but I'm sure there's tons of competition too. But
it's fierce.
I mean, definitely every aspect of the music community is competitive, but I think in opera, it's a smaller community. The audience is smaller, so the companies are more strapped for cash, and they don't have millions and millions to throw around, like a Hollywood studio. So they're going to be very, very selective, and they also want to make their season. There are very few companies who do all new music, just 100% new music. Usually they try to balance it out. Put some Verdi in, put some Puccini in, then maybe one new opera a season. So that's that's where it gets competitive.
Because Du Yoon is not an old composer. She just won the Pulitzer Prize this year, and she's not. She's in her 20s, right, Walker?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah.
Pretty young. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, it is possible. There are some very young composers who are. Nico Muhly, for example. But Nico Muhly doesn't just write opera. He wrote a film score. He has actually sort of a pop rock sort of element to his stuff as well. He's releasing his own works, but he's made some money as a younger person. But it can't just be about that in opera. It's never really been a profit-making concern.
I think in the 19th century it was. When Verdi was writing opera, they made a ton of money at those theaters.
Because it was the musical theater.
It was the musical theater, or like the movie. It was like the movies for us, for today's world. So I think it really goes back to what Peter said about being flexible. You might start thinking about your opera in one way, but then you'll see an opportunity spring up, or you'll talk to someone who needs a certain type of opera, and you should go for that, and pay attention to what's going on, and who's looking for a composer, who wants to commission something new, and then craft what you write around that.
Right.
I think that's a smarter way to do it.
Okay.
Yeah, there are certain programs that you guys should know about. Do you know about American Lyric Theater?
Yeah, I actually got to interview Lawrence Edelson. Is that? Yeah,
Edelson,
he was on the podcast a long time ago.
Good.
Yeah, I mean, trying to get into these programs,
Right.
Opera America has programs, obviously, for composers. Fort Worth, they have the Pioneers program. You know about that, right?
Actually, I don't.
I don't know if I don't think that's still going on, Walker. Is it?
Oh yeah, it's still going on. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes. So it's a program at Fort Worth Opera where you can submit a new opera, and if they accept it, they showcase it in front of a lot of general directors and people in the opera world. It's just a fantastic way to get people to hear your opera. I mean, and also the New Works Forum at Opera America.
Right. Do you know about the American Opera Projects?
I have heard about that one. Yep.
AOP. It's another great group that has all sorts of opportunities for composers.
Mm-hmm.
So, Peter, when you started your response to my question about can composers make money, you you said, well, some can. And I was reading between the lines, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, but you seem to have strong opinions about what it takes to be a successful opera composer today.
Well, there seem to be sort of two tracks going on right now in opera composing. There's sort of this academic track where, legitimacy is found through that sort of whole program. And a lot of the music sounds that way, and it's sort of the established route. And then there's this whole other way that's, I guess they're calling it American opera theater, as opposed to just opera. And it's a much more expansive idea about the idea of theater with sung music. And it really reaches into the rock repertoire and jazz, into this. It's much more broad and popular sounding, and there is a lot of activity going on in that area right now. Do you guys know about the Prototype Festival that happens every year?
Tell us more about that.
Beth Morrison Projects, I think they're, in their sixth year, Walker? I think this is their sixth year. Yeah. And I know that they produce things all over the country. And look up bethmorrisonprojects.org. I'm pretty sure that is their website. And they are producing this whole sort of branch of sort of a resurgence of what American opera and the musical theater. Musical theater and opera divisions got very clear for a while, but it's sort of muddied now. And the sort of vernacular music and the art music are reaching towards each other to create a whole sort of, they're calling it that term. And it's totally different. It doesn't have the same platforms. A lot of it is very abstract. Some of it sounds almost like an oratorio. But you should really check out that website, the Beth Morrison Project. They're doing great work. And it's happening in January. They have this big thing called the Prototype Festival for 2 weeks, and they have how many premieres this year? 7, I think. A lot.
Yeah, a lot per year. So that means she is someone else you could send an opera to possibly get it produced. And she also works with a space called Here in New York, HERE. You can go to here.org, and Kristen Marting is the artistic director, and they are also interested in producing opera and actually developing new operas. So those two companies, Prototype and Here, work together to create stuff.
So between these two different tracks, you kind of differentiated between the academic opera versus American opera theater.
Opera theater. Yeah. So the American opera theater also, they're also much more experimental. They're not necessarily producing behind a proscenium. They're not necessarily producing with a standard orchestra. They're not necessarily producing with the same kind of vocal technique. It doesn't sound like opera singers all the time. So they're sort of freeing up the compositions. They don't sound like musical theater that you know. And it doesn't sound like the opera that you know. It's this wonderful, different artistic expression, and it's really powerful. And listen, Du Yoon, the one who won the Pulitzer Prize, that was done at Prototype, and it was through them. Missy Mazzoli's Breaking the Waves. A lot of the David Little's Soldiers. Is it Soldier Stories? Is that what it's called?
Soldier Songs?
Yeah, Soldier Songs was done through them. So
they did Dog Days.
Dog Days was done through them. So it's I don't know if these are things that people know about.
Yeah, but, Missy's been on the podcast.
Oh yeah, and she's working with different ensembles. She doesn't always, have you had David Little on? Wonderful.
No, but we've been trying, and it's just been a scheduling issue.
Yeah.
But he works with he'll work with something that's half rock band, half, wind ensemble, completely different. Gregory Spears is being produced this year. They're doing Fellow Travelers here in the city. And I know he's worked with some really interesting ensembles.
Yeah, and he's been on the podcast too.
Yeah, great guy.
Really cool music. Okay, so I'm just trying to get a sense here for a composer who's brand new to opera. You've helped us understand what are all the things we need to consider in the terms of production and who needs to be on the team. And you've given us lots of resources of places we can go, programs to look into. But I kind of want to ask you for your opinion. What are some of the most common mistakes you see composers who are new to opera committing?
Do you want to go first, Walker, or I have one?
You go ahead.
Thinking that they should work with a poet is always a big problem.
Oh, really?
Oh my God. Don't do it. Yeah, poets do not think about story the way that a lyricist will. It's a different thing. And I've done quite a few operas that have had poets, and it's always very difficult to communicate the story because their idea, a poet's job is to bend language in ways that have double and triple meaning, and it makes it that's really hard to communicate in song. And for audiences, it gets it's a whole different experience. So that I think going straight to a poet is not the first way to go when you're looking for a lyricist. That's my first big mistake. What's yours, Walker?
I mean, I think it's the most important thing for me is remembering that opera is a form of theater. It's not an oratorio. It's not a piano concerto. It is a story being told. And as a story, it needs to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. It needs to be clear enough so the audience understands what's going on. And in terms of the words, you don't need as many words to convey meaning and carry music as you would in a play. Right. So you can't just take an entire Shakespeare monologue and set it to music. It would take like half an hour. You need to think about how long do I want this opera to be, that all feeds into what kind of venue do you want it to be in, and when you know what you're going for, then plan accordingly. So we need this to happen by this point, this to happen by this point in the story. So it has a clear climax. So it comes across as a piece of theater that the audience can really follow. So, a lot of composers don't really pay attention to theater, but I think it's really important to go out and see a play, see a musical, all the different things that are going on right now, because all of those things can affect how you would create your opera.
Right, and I think a lot of the issue sometimes gets sucked into the idea of narrator, like the story is told through narrator. Try to avoid that. I've seen a lot of operas that have a narrator character, and it's very, very difficult to have the story carried that way and be interesting for an audience. Now, there are exceptions. There's View from the Bridge, Our Town, but those are very specific kind of constructions. Once you get a narrator or a Greek chorus, going on to tell the story, that makes it very hard to tell a story. Really has to be the story should be told like a play, where the words are not just carrying the story. You don't want to say "I am running." The action has to actually occur on the stage, just like it does in a play. That it should be shown. Don't tell them. Show the action through the music. You know what I mean? Right. And I think that the other thing that what makes an opera is that the orchestra itself is a character. That's the thing that's showing the inner life of what's going on in the within the characters. That's the difference between a song and an opera for me. A song, you just tell the story in the song, but in an opera, the orchestra itself is its own story-carrying instrument. Does that make sense, or was that
100%? No, I totally get it.
Silly.
Not silly at all.
So when you're planning it out, you can think, what moments do I want the orchestra to tell the story? It could help. Even as you're writing it, to talk to a director or someone who works in the theater. and say, look, I want to write this opera based on, Apocalypse Now, what are the moments when we could just do movement and music. So I think that is important, because a lot of composers tend to work alone. And it's totally fine. A lot of writers work alone, but it's important to get out and see what's going on and get a sense of how stories are told. Actually, Shakespeare is a good resource to go to, because Shakespeare, when he was writing, had very little in terms of sets or effects or anything. I mean, it was all the plays were done in broad daylight. So when you read Shakespeare, you can see how there's obviously a whole physical score going on that is carrying the words along. So that's something good to remember. That's what the orchestra would do. The orchestra is supplying, all that interesting stuff happening around the story.
Right, and also consider how long it takes to do things. Like if you have characters that have to put something down, or in the lyrics are saying that there's a physical action that's going to occur on the stage, make sure you write enough music for that physical action to actually occur.
Yeah.
I've had, or sometimes they write too much music,
Right.
So they're crossing the stage and they've written an 2 pages of music for them to get to the other side of the stage. Well, unless the stage is, do you know what I mean?
I do.
I mean, timing is really...
For me, it doesn't get any better than Act 1 of Marriage of Figaro. Listen to that and take a look at how Mozart has set that whole scene where Cherubino is hiding in the chair.
Right.
And there is an extremely key moment, when the Count lifts up the blanket and exposes Cherubino, and it's all about timing, and it's all about using the music to get the humor across. So he had an amazing sense of timing, where if you just follow what's going on in the scene, it works perfectly. You just don't want to get in the way of it. So that's a good for inspiration.
Yeah. I think that also kind of ties into your comment about making sure you're working with a librettist, not necessarily a poet, because sometimes it can take a long time in music to say 2 or 3 lines of text.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So you have to communicate so much of the drama and the story through really concise language too.
Right.
Exactly.
And the other thing that I think often happens with inexperienced composers is that the music gets completely in the way of the singer being able to sing. And, the emotions get bigger and bigger. Sometimes you want to clear the orchestra out of the way, let there be space for a singer to sing and be heard. Very often, the high note will be accompanied by the orchestra hitting their high note at the same time. Well, wait, let the singer hit the high note and then the orchestra come in 2 beats later. Allow there to be space for words to be heard. Basically get out of the way. Don't overwrite everything. Because it's so easy to overwrite, because opera's very dramatic, right? So you don't want to necessarily gild the lily beyond, and completely obliterate the singer who's on the stage.
Yeah. What's getting you guys really excited right now about American opera? What gets you pumped?
I mean, I get pumped for new forms, just totally new forms. Just doing something that's completely original, uses new sounds, new timbres, even new instruments that I haven't heard before. I'm getting excited for The Exterminating Angel at the Met, because the orchestra has a lot of really interesting instruments and sound effects that you wouldn't normally hear in an orchestra. So I like something. I like it when people are daring and they try something exciting and really original. Don't do something that's already been done. Do something that you do well, where you can really make a splash.
Yeah, for me, what gets me excited is a realization I've had maybe in the past 5 years is that the experience of an audience is just as great in a small, intimate, up-close opera performance as it is in the largest opera house. And that hearing a great singer perform even with the smallest ensemble, but up close in the right setting, can tear your heart out, and you can feel it very emotionally, and it hits you very viscerally. When you're in a big house, sometimes things seem to occur at a remove. It's just so far away. And that I've learned that I really prefer to experience things in smaller, up close, more intimate pieces. So when you're writing these works, these can be the great works that really move people. It doesn't have to be the largest Leviathan work, It's, the depths of the human soul can be communicated with the tiniest amount of resources. Don't let that stop you from learning how to write the deeply emotional music,
Do you think that there's a place for opera with house concerts?
What do you mean by house concert?
Small, intimate, usually these are chamber performances.
Oh my gosh, yes.
I think so, and it's happening. It's already happening. Yeah. Definitely.
Yeah. So there's only like between 15 and 30 people present, and it's very intimate.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that's how opera was invented. That's the first opera was like that. It was operas created in a wealthy person's house with a band that was hired by that person, and a composer who was hired to write music for it, and it happened in a living room. It happened in just a room in this person's house, and yeah, it's amazing. It's intimate. It's powerful. It's happening in theater as well. You can definitely do that.
Yeah, I mean, I know that in New York we're incredibly spoiled. We have over 80 different opera entities in the city. And so there's operas of all scale here. And seriously, opera in the house, that is a lot of where the life of New York opera is at this moment. That's what kind of makes the culture interesting at this point. Because, once you put it on a big stage, it's like being in a museum, It's sort of institutionalized, it's put behind a proscenium. But that's a very ossifying experience to a work of art, when you're flexible and you can do something like on a boat. There's some stuff done on a World War II, Vietnam World War II ship that was done here in the city that was incredible. It doesn't have to be in the traditional space to be good.
I think audiences now are much more adventuresome.
That's my story.
The audiences are willing.
Did I lose you?
No. Audiences are willing to go to someone's apartment. Like there was a guy in my neighborhood who actually was he was doing a solo play, and I guess someone from the New York Times came and saw it, and it became like a hit. I mean, people were coming to this guy's apartment 6 nights a week to see this little one-man show.
Wow.
So you can do it. You can definitely do it if you get the word out. I mean, I don't know about audiences in other cities, but audiences in New York are very adventuresome, and they will go out of their way to find something interesting. You can always pair it, with beer or food or There's lots of different ways you can frame a performance. And you can get really creative about where you do it. So people love that.
Well, I live in the Midwest, where audiences tend to be a little bit more conservative and less adventurous. But I think that there's a way to do it through house concerts. It's going to be easier to get people to go to a friend's house where they can be comfortable in the living room with a glass of wine and hors d'oeuvres than to have to go dress up, go make it a formal event.
Definitely. You could definitely do that. Yeah.
Did we?
Yeah, I don't think it's, no, I'm back. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I don't think it's a geographical thing. I think that all that you as an opera composer has to do is to set it out there and say that you want people to hear it. There's really, if you're just welcoming and you want people to be there and you want people to be relaxed, like you guys were saying, I think the audience will come. They'll be there. A lot of the problem with opera is that it had got this reputation of, we only want to be for a certain elite. And I think if we break that wall down, audiences will come, basically.
Sure.
Yeah. I mean, I was in Idaho, and we did a performance of Glory Denied in an airplane hangar.
Right.
And we had this an actual jet that was right next to us in the airplane hangar. And it was a little out of the way, but people came to it and they were excited. They came and they were interested in being in a totally new space, and we did it in a way where we had lighting instruments and we made the most of the space, and that's really fun. I mean, site-specific performance is to me was some of the most exciting stuff you can do. And people in the Midwest are, they're communal. They like to get together. So you could do it at a bar. You could do it. There's lots of places you could do it.
But also you should redefine what your idea of community is. We often think of, we'll perform for the community. Well, there's a lot of composers who are focusing on the community, let's say the homeless community. Last week I mentioned we have this thing called the Opera Fix. There's an opera company that specializes in performing with homeless people. It's sung by people who have been homeless and some who are homeless. There's also a composer we spoke to that wrote an opera with airline stewards. And also another one who wrote, she also wrote one for the trash collectors in Berlin. You can actually create audiences by having alternate performers. It doesn't have to be you know what I mean? Don't just write for opera singers. Consider opening it up. Find find some social group that already exists in your community. Let's say you have a handbell choir. We were talking about this on our last show. If you have a lot of handbell choirs, well, write an opera for handbell choirs. Make sure that they're involved in it in some way. Try and look in your community. Walk around and see, is there an Italian American community? Maybe they could get involved. Or there's so many different groups out there of people who are already together that you could just sort of tap into that social structure and work with them and bring them to opera, and they'll bring you a lot of things too.
Wow. It's a good point. Well, I'd love to get into the lightning round, but before we take a break and do that, do you guys have anything else that you wanted to cover but I failed to ask?
No, I think we covered a lot.
Yeah.
Sweet. Yeah, I think we did cover a lot. It's been great. Well, let's take a quick break and then we'll come back for the lightning round. I am in the process of booking speaking gigs and seminars and workshops for the spring. If you are an educator and would like me to Skype in or visit your classroom or school to talk about the business of music, setting yourself up for success after graduation, what it means to think like a small business owner, branding, marketing, or mindset, send me an email. You can do that most easily through the portfoliocomposer.com website. There's a contact page which allows you to fill out a form and send me a quick email. I'd love to discuss this with you further before all my time gets completely eaten up. I look forward to hearing from you guys. Thanks.
Welcome to the lightning round.
If you guys could turn back the clock, what advice would you give to your 20-year-old self?
Don't take yourself so seriously.
Yeah?
Yeah. Life, don't be too serious about it.
Okay. And what about you, Walker?
I would say pick something and go with it. Don't spread yourself too thin. If pick something that inspires you and go deeper into it. Don't try to conquer the world all at once, but work with what you know and get to the bottom of that. Focus, get specific.
What is a personal habit of yours that you feel leads to your success?
A personal habit for me, and this is a really stupid one, but waking up early and going for a walk. I find that I solve a lot of my problems by just getting up and doing something. instead of, don't wait around for the day, just walk. And I walk 4 or 5 miles and just let my mind wander. And really a lot of the conducting problems, organizational problems, inspiration, it'll all happen right then and there for me.
I don't think that's stupid at all. I think that's brilliant. That's a great habit.
What time do you wake up, Peter?
I wake up between 6 and 6:30.
Okay. Well, I get up at 6 because that's when my daughter wakes up, and I have to get her. But that's still good. I would say for me, the habit of listening, just listening to what people say. I try to really listen to other people's points of view and hear what they're saying, and not put words in their mouth, or not try to assume that I know what they're thinking.
That is a brilliant habit. I'm sure it helps with your empathy and interpersonal relationships too.
It does. And in opera, like we were saying, opera is so collaborative that, and if you're working with a librettist, you need to really understand each other and listen to each other.
What is an instrument you have always wanted to learn to play, and why?
Oh, the violin.
Yeah?
Definitely.
Why?
Oh, yeah. As a conductor, it's just the one thing, it consumes so much of your time. And if that was second nature to me, it would have been very, very helpful. It's also great for the ear. There's a lot of good things about the violin, but that would have been my first instrument if I had a choice.
Mm-hmm.
I would say the piano. I can play a little bit on the piano, but I wish I was really proficient on the piano, just because it's just so handy. But aside from the piano, the drums is something I've always wanted to learn how to play, because it just looks like so much fun.
Maybe you need to start a rock band.
I think I do. I'm going to get an 8-track player, to start recording songs.
That's right. All right, so this next question is often the most challenging for people to answer, because you can probably think immediately once I ask it of 6 to 12 different pieces that qualify. But I want you to just choose one. What is one composition that had a profound impact on you, and why? And this doesn't have to be concert music, but I'm looking for those pieces that provided life-changing moments. Brian Wilson of the Beach Boys tells the story of being in the car and driving when he hears Phil Spector's Be My Baby, performed by the Ronettes, and he has to pull over to the side of the road because his mind is literally blown by what he's hearing. That's the kind of moment I'm looking for. So what is a piece that did that for you?
I would say Bluebeard's Castle. Peter likes this piece also, but Bluebeard's Castle really blew my mind. The opera by Bartók. Mm-hmm. It's just amazing because it only has 2 characters, and it is so incredibly profound and so gorgeous, and it just creates so many different worlds within it, and it says so much, and it goes so far with just 2 characters. I just think it's an incredible masterpiece. It also isn't even that long, but it packs so much interest, so many interesting ideas, and complexity in a very manageable length. And just the way, Bartók is also just one of my favorites. Just his ability to convey emotion and depth and all the subtle interplay between 2 people having a conversation, and while also making the castle come to life and so many other things come to life. Bluebeard's past and future and his wives, and there's so many things going on, but it just flows so effortlessly that it blows me away every time I hear it.
Great.
For me, I'm going to say that this moment happened when I was in high school, and I found a record that my dad had a really lovely record collection, and it was The Rite of Spring. And I put this record on. Now, I hadn't listened to really any 20th century music. It was all classical. I was playing the piano, and there was nothing really within the past 100 years or anything even remotely modern in what I played, except for like the pop stuff that any kid, picks up. So I put this thing on, and it was just so outside the box for me, and sensual and crazy, and I couldn't. The fact that my mind didn't know what was going to come next was so overwhelming, and I became obsessed with it. And it really sort of opened up my mind to the idea of tonality as being a much larger thing. Mm-hmm. And from that moment on, I was like, every time there was a piece that I had never heard of the composer, or I had never heard of the work, it made me really hungry to actually go and hear it. But it was the first time. It was the first time it was sort of like undiscovered country. So that for me ignited the sense of adventure in music, and it meant an awful lot to me.
Oh, it's a tremendous piece. Both of those are great pieces. Can you name a piece by a minority or female composer that you think everyone should listen to and know?
Oh, there's so many. Have we mentioned Breaking the Waves?
Missy Mazzoli's?
Yeah. Have you gotten to that? It's an amazing piece. And what's lovely about it is the sort of the way that Missy carries the story in the orchestra, as well as how the vocal lines carry the story through. It's quite an achievement. That to me is one of the greatest. It doesn't matter whether it was a man or a woman, or a minority or whatever.
Sure.
I think that's just you know what I'm saying?
The point isn't that they're like, oh, this is a female opera. It's just that I'm trying to be conscious of the fact that we often don't recognize so much of the great art that's out there that happens to be created by female and minority composers. So I'm just trying to be more aware of that and opening my listening
listen to our podcast, because over 50% of our works are done by minorities of some sort.
Sure. Yeah, and I've got almost half my guests are females too.
Yeah, and it's not because we're looking for it to be that way. It's just that's what's interesting now.
Right.
That the works that are being written right now just happen to be written by women, minorities, just really interesting people with interesting points of view, Muslim even, or there's really lots of stuff going on out there.
Walker, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I would say there's two that come to mind. Paola Prestini's piece, The Aging Magician, is really fascinating. It says Rindy Eckert in it, and uses all of this crazy complex sort of machine, and a lot of really interesting puppetry. It's just a really well conceived, just fascinating story. The other one was also a guest on our show, Nkiru Okoye. Her opera Harriet Tubman, When I Crossed That Line to Freedom, really powerful, really powerful. The way she references spirituals and African American music, and tells this really inspiring story about Harriet Tubman. It's fabulous.
And also check out Kamala Sankaram, who's also getting a lot of her work done. She's pretty amazing.
Thumbprint, is it?
Thumbprint, yeah.
Yeah, it's really great.
And where on the internet can people go to learn more about your podcast and about the two of you individually?
indieopera.com. It's very simple. All of our stuff is on there, and we have links. I know, Walker, you have a website too?
Yeah, just walkerlewisdirector.com.
Now, I actually have a peterszep.com, but I don't think I put anything new on that in years. So don't go there.
Or they could go to LinkedIn. I think I actually update my LinkedIn more often than my website.
Do you?
Yeah, so Walker Lewis and LinkedIn, yeah.
Well, that's great. Peter, and Walker, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast. I really appreciate you taking the time to speak with me and to answer my questions. Some of them very newbie to the opera world, but I think this is a really interesting thing. And opera right now seems to have momentum. And people are doing cool things. And a lot of composers want to write opera because it's such an encompassing medium where you get to tell stories and it's more than just sitting and listening.
Right. Well, thank you so much, Garrett.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, I mean, if I had to say one thing to your listeners, it would be now is the time to do it. Now is the time. Don't wait. Jump in because like you said, there's a lot of momentum. There's a lot of adventuresome audience members out there who want to hear more and new stuff. So get on it and do it.
Will do. All right. Thank you so much.
All right. Thanks, Garrett.
Thank you.